Greetings, Venturers. This is Lauren, your guild advisor, and welcome to DanMachi Season 3 cut content and review for Episode 9. And first of all, let's just say, wow! Out of all the episodes I've gone over so far in this season, this one is far, way and beyond, way and above, the most altered and changed episode of the bunch. And really, there's really just one specific scene and I'm really peeved about being skipped, because I think it's extremely valuable to understanding like Finn and Loki Familia as a whole, but we'll get to that in the video. First of all, before we get right into it, I just want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving to everyone that celebrated it before. Hopefully you were all staying safe and in some way, shape, or form spending time with your families. So again, happy Thanksgiving, and we're into the holiday season. Now, as for DanMachi Season 3 Episode 9, we're just going to go straight into it. This is probably going to be a long video, but I'll try to make it as short as possible. But this is, again, the episode with by far the most skips, changes, and cuts and alterations of all the ones previous, and it was part of my worry because, again, Volume 11 is the longest of the 3 novels being adapted, and it's only getting 4 episodes. But yeah, let's just go into it. So first of all, it adapts like the last few pages of Volume 10, where Icarus gets banished from Orario. A lot of the blame is being placed on Icarus Familia for the monsters running amok in Orario, and like Hermes says to Uranus, even though Icarus Familia took some of that blame, there is still one person that is visually seen in Orario that blame can be shifted to, and that is Belle. And that finishes off Volume 10, and then we get into Volume 11. And this episode adapts about like 87 pages of Volume 11, though it does kind of skip one scene that I think may get referenced later on. We'll just see what happens in next episode. But yeah, it's covering a lot of content, and I think that's very clear even by anime onlys when there's like some montaging going on to quickly get the setup for the rest of the season. First off, there's some dialogue with Mord that you see here. The context of the scene has changed a little tiny bit. Earlier before in the novel, Mord was with other adventurers scouting throughout the sewers, looking for the Xenos because the guild has issued bounties on them, and that's when they're having a conversation where some of them are ridiculing Belle, and then Mord actually says straight up, hey, stop picking on little rookie, and then he mentions like even though he's disappointed that Belle is like being driven somewhat by greed, he kind of blames it on the debt that Hestia Familia has, and that is his reasonings for Belle's actions. And while the scouting party is going out throughout the sewers, Leto actually appears and drives them away because the Xenos are hiding close to that area. And then later on, they skipped a scene with Asterius, and basically it's just showcasing that Asterius also has a desire, just like Rey wants to fly in the sky, Leto wants to see the surface. Asterius has this dream of fighting this individual, and he's searching for that battle. And he fights off some adventurers that are looking for him in the sewers, and he holds off on killing them due to a promise he made to the Xenos. And again, he's searching to fight this one person that he sees in his dreams. And one interesting detail is that the arm that I severed, the Xenos actually picked that up and encased it in ice, so they can eventually get it to Asterius and then heal it at some point. And it should be possible because, as you can see from last episode, Fells is a pretty good healer. And if you remember last episode, I was kind of disappointed by how they didn't draw a lot of the other Loki Familia members that were involved in all the battles. We got to see Elfie in the scene right before the OP. And in this episode, Hermes is being used a lot as this expositional tool, like just saying a bunch of the plot of the anime throughout all of this, and it really just feels like a shortcut that they're using Hermes for, because a lot of the information that he's dishing out is actually done through different scenes throughout the light novel and by different characters, but this was their way of trying to like shorten everything and get it together into one compact episode for setup for the rest of the 3, because again, we only have 4 episodes to work with. For example, Hermes is talking about the Zenos situation with Uranus, and they also have Hermes explain Ganesha Familia's stance on the situation, like saying that Ganesha Familia is increasing the security around Babel Tower, the entrance to the dungeon, instead of the scene that was skipped where Ganesha is actually talking to Shakti, the leader of Ganesha Familia, and they have this conversation where Ganesha was making sure Shakti was recovering all right, and he wanted to give her time to make up her mind about the Zeno situation. And they basically decide together that they have to side with the people of Orario, because that is ultimately their responsibility as this de facto police force of Orario, to protect the people. So they have to side with the people and not the Zenos. And the thing that really caught me off guard in this episode was just the whole sequence of Hermes visiting Hestia Familia's home, because he does not do that in the light novel. That conversation, or a lot of the conversation that Hermes has with Hestia and Belle in this episode, happens strictly with just Belle at a later point in the light novel, and they actually skip a very important scene involving Finn right before that conversation would have taken place, while they're montaging Fel sending an owl out to Hestia Familia. There's actually a whole scene dedicated to Fel's talking with the Zenos about the situation, and also setting out that letter, and he sends that letter much later on in the light novel than you see here at the very beginning of the episode. And the anime skips to Belle and Hestia walking around Orario. Before that point, Belle actually walked into the living room where Mikoto, Haruhime, and Lily were, and he told Hestia that he wanted to walk around Orario because for the past few days, Hestia told him to stay in the Familia home while things and emotions die down in Orario, because he is currently being scrutinized, obviously, due to the decisions he made last episode. And Hestia does allow him to walk around the city, but with her as bodyguard. And you see later on in the episode that Hestia is protecting Belle and telling everyone to put the blame on her because of the debt that Hestia Familia owes to Hephaestus for the Hestia knife. And I don't like being too nitpicky, but I couldn't help but notice that in this particular frame, Belle's hair looks really weirdly drawn. That's just something that caught my eye. And in the anime, they go straight to Belle bumping into eyes. During this walk that Hestia and Belle are having, the first place they actually go to is the pub, and Seer is not there in the light novel. And I'll explain a bit about Seer later on, but basically Belle goes to the pub. Belle sees Ryu, and he wants to thank her for the help she has given him in the past few episodes, and he's just afraid to speak up to her, so she actually walks down to Belle and tells her that she doesn't believe in rumors but what she sees in front of her. And Ryu says that with a slight smile that makes Belle all teary-eyed, because that's one person that still believes in him. And he does indeed thank Ryu, and they talk about what happened on floor 18. Ryu mentions the Black Minotaur, and Belle is like having these thoughts of, is this the Zenos that Lita was talking about that was stronger than him? And Ryu mentions that Seer is not at the pub right now, she's taking time off to be somewhere else. And as Belle and Hestia leave the pub and go onto Daedalus Street, Ryu leaves Belle with some parting words to not be discouraged about the decisions that he made. He needs to keep his spirit strong, and these words of encouragement especially resonate within Belle, because Ryu is actually one of the few people that can sympathize with Belle's situation. Because, as we know, Ryu made the decision to exact her revenge on members of Evilus that eradicated her fellow members of Estrella Familia, and that's why she's blacklisted by the guild. So Ryu is very familiar with the feelings that Belle has right now. And again, because Ryu is my favorite character, I'm a bit sad that this scene was skipped. Now back to the scene where Eyes and Belle meet at Daedalus Street. It's pretty much the same way it happens in the anime, but Eyes is accompanied by some lower level Loki Familia members that are scouting around the area. Loki sends them off the same way, like, go back to Finn. And the conversation between Loki, Hestia, and Belle is very similar to the anime as well. The one difference is that in the light novel, Belle notices these 3 children pass by in an alleyway, and while Hestia is bickering with Loki, Hestia notices this from Bel and says to Bel that he can leave and go after what he might have seen, and she wants to talk to Loki alone. And you guys will find out what that conversation was between Hestia and Loki a bit later on, probably next episode if they choose to adapt it, but it's obviously an important conversation between the two. But as for Bel, like I said, he's chasing after these 3 children he recognizes, and he ends up in front of this church that's being used as an orphanage. And this is a location that was introduced in Volume 8 of the light novel series. And again, if you have seen my previous videos, like before you watch Season 3, you'll know that the second season skipped over quite a bit from Volume 8, about like 70% of the content, and this is part of it. The introduction of these 3 children and the orphanage, and Seer who takes care of them, and that's why Seer is absent from the pub in the light novel. She's taking care of the situation at the orphanage because she's there to orchestrate a place to where the kids can evacuate to, because currently Daedalus Street is not safe because it's about to become a battleground between the Xenos, Loki Familia, and Hestia Familia. But when Bel meets up with these 3 children, they kinda are afraid of him, and one of them actually calls Bel a traitor, and they go back into the church and kind of slam the door like as a warning, don't come in here. And out of everyone that's ridiculed Bel so far, this is the one that hits him the most, because obviously they're children and he got along with them very well in Volume 8 of the light novel, because he's an adventurer that they looked up to, that they spent time together with. But this is when Seer comes out of the orphanage, sees Bel, and then she comforts him in a very similar way to how the anime handles it, where the anime just has her at the pub and then they take a walk and sit down on a bench. But the conversation is very similar, where Seer tells him that there are still people with him that believe in him. And as a light novel reader, there is another part from Seer's story that was skipped in Season 2 from Volume 8 that is extremely important for this remaining 3 episodes. And I really have no clue how they're going to write around it, because it's extremely important to the plot. And after this scene with Seer and Bel, there's a skip scene between Royman, the head of the guild, and Finn. Now, Royman is upset at Finn because Loki Familia kind of just took charge of Daedalus Street without any orders. And Royman kind of says, hey, I want Ganesha Familia to do this. And Finn counters, saying Ganesha Familia is still recovering from that expedition down onto floor 18. And he makes a deal with Royman, saying that he'll give Royman a key to Gnosis if he'll let Loki Familia take care of the defense. And Royman accepts that deal, but what Finn does not tell him is that he suspects that there are multiple keys to open the doors of Gnosis. And Finn also has this conversation with Loki Familia, where he suspects that Bel knows something about the monsters that they don't, and that Bel was probably left with no choice but to oppose Loki Familia. And Finn's suspicions of Bel make Eyes a bit uneasy, but Finn reassures Eyes that he will not label Bel as an enemy until he gets Bel's side of the story. And Eyes told Finn that she spotted Bel in Daedalus Street earlier, so Finn decides to go and find Bel. And this conversation between Finn and Bel is one of the things that is skipped, and I'm just, ugh. Out of all the things they would skip, this would be one of them, and it's crazy because it's a very important conversation between the two, and it's very important so you understand where Finn is coming from, because omitting this conversation, it's like the anime really wants to paint a bad light on Loki Familia and Finn without really explaining their actions. So Finn does find Bel, and he says he's willing to turn a blind eye to Bel's actions from before, because he assumes that Bel was kind of forced into that position. He tells Bel all that he wants to do is resolve the current situation in Orario, where monsters are still trapped on the surface. He mentions that if they were properly able to exchange information, like between Hestia Familia and Loki Familia, if they were able to properly communicate, maybe that understanding from last episode would never have happened. And Bel does realize that to a point, but in Bel's mind, he made the decision to oppose Loki Familia the second he saw that Finn took no hesitation to throwing his spear and pinning Weene into the wall. Like, after Bell saw that, he saw that there really wouldn't be true negotiation between Loki Familia and himself. Because right now, Finn is the type of person that's a realist. He'll throw aside personal feelings to get things done. And Bell does contemplate talking to Finn about the Xenos, but before Bell even can, Hermes comes around the corner and interrupts the conversation. And when Finn sees that Hermes interrupts that conversation, he has a clue that Hermes is probably in on the Xenos stuff as well. He decides to leave, but just before Finn leaves, he asks Bell a question. If he has a key, and he's referencing Gnosis. And it's just one look at Bell's expression, and it's all Finn needs to realize that, yes, Bell does know that there are keys that go into Gnosis to open the door into the dungeon, but Bell doesn't have it. So yeah, kind of a important conversation happening between the captains of Loki and Hestia Familia being skipped in the anime, and at least giving you some context behind some of Finn's decisions. And as for the anime onlys, I know some of you just don't want to read a light novel and would prefer just watching an anime, but if anything, if you can only read one light novel, one volume of DanMachi, this is the one I want you to read. Volume 11, please. Because so much stuff is already being altered here in episode 9, and it makes me worry for the last 3 episodes, because we still have over 220 pages to go and only 3 episodes to work with. And now that Bell and Hermes are together in the alleyway, Hermes has a similar conversation to Bell in the light novel that he had at the very beginning of this episode that I said was a change and addition to the anime. And like the anime, Hermes warns Bell not to talk about the Xenos to Loki Familia. And then Hestia comes and finds the both of them, and Hermes says farewell to Bell without really saying anything to Hestia. And Hestia has her suspicions about Hermes because of that, not even saying anything to her. And now we have the scene between Aisha, Osvi, and Ryu. If you can see in the anime, Osvi has these huge bags under her eyes, and it's because Hermes has her working overtime on something, and she's really complaining about that in the light novel. And as Osvi displays here in the anime, all you need to do to get the cooperation of Aisha and Ryu is mention Bell, and also as an extra bonus, mention Evilist to Ryu. And the conversation between Hephaestus, Take, and Miyake is mostly the same. The only thing that's really skipped is that they mention that if they told the other gods about the Xenos, it would likely just cause chaos, because a lot of the gods are on Orario to be entertained. So undoubtedly, there would be some gods who just want to cause chaos for the whole situation currently happening in Orario. And this is where in the light novel where Fels starts writing that letter to Hestia Familia. The special thing about him writing it is that he's using a special pen that uses blood ink, so he had to get blood from Leto because Fels is all bones. And the pen that he uses is actually made by Osvi. And the scene where Hestia Familia is coming together in a group to support the Xenos, it's a bit different in the light novel, because Hestia poses the question of what they want to do about the Xenos situation, but when she asks that question, she only looks at the members besides Bell, and when Bell sees that she's talking to the other members, he tries to stop her, saying, "Hey, this is my problem, I don't want you guys involved." And Hestia basically backfires on Bell, saying that because he is the captain of Hestia Familia, any decision he makes involves the rest of the Familia. And then you have all of them individually reassuring Bell that they are in this together and they do want to support the Xenos. And then the anime does this type of montage where Hestia Familia is making all these preparations. I don't really have too much of a problem with it, but what's happening basically is that Lily and Bell are going to this place that Fels designated to get those magic items. It's a place called the Witch's Hideout, and they meet this old lady there that's basically a supporter of Fels, and she's the one that opens the bookshelf, and then it reveals that hidden room with all these magic items that Fels has made. Most notably, the 2 oculi that Bell and Lily grab so they can communicate with the Xenos, because they send over one of the oculi via the owl that Fels has, and they're able to openly communicate verbally and also see some of the surroundings when they're communicating with the 2 oculi. And of course, they also grab that cloak that you see Welf use in the anime that turns him invisible. And in addition to the Daedalus notebook that Hermes gave Oranos and Oranos gives to Hestia, Hestia also gets a map of Daedalus Street that Fel's made from Oranos as well. And you can see that map being used by Mikoto in the anime. And the anime tries to combine and condense a lot of these scenes that Hestia, Familia, Xenos, and Fels all have together. The conversation that Fels has with the Xenos about using Bell as a decoy happens before they're able to communicate with Hestia, Familia with the oculi, but I am very happy they kept that line that Leto says, calling Fels a bag of bones, and Fels takes huge offense to that. It's like, hey, what does that have to do with anything? I'm glad they kept that part in. And I'm also glad that they kept the scene where Rene reassures Leto that they can repay Hestia Familia for all that they're doing later on. It doesn't have to be right away, but they can still repay them in some way, shape, or form after all of this ends. And look guys, Gross is actually smiling. Now as Hestia Familia is going over the plan, it's actually Fels that's really detailing what the plan is in the light novel, because they're communicating through the oculi, and the oculi can not only communicate voice, but it can also communicate visuals, so they can actually see around them, and Fels actually copied a lot of the Daedalus notebook and the map via the Oculus. And after their plans are made, Hestia Familia and the Xenos make a vow to one day meet again after the escape is successful. And just like in the anime, Finn is able to pretty much predict what Fel's plan is on using Bell as a decoy. And the reason why Finn can even do that is because he is a very smart tactician, and he's able to outmaneuver Fels, because even though Fels is very, very old, Fels has really no experience in commanding like large-scale operations, which Finn does a lot as head of Loki Familia. And again, another thing I like in this scene with Loki Familia is that you see more of the members of Loki Familia. You see Raoul, you see Aki, you see Lafia, you see Cruz. You see a lot more people in Loki Familia than I wanted to see last episode. But yeah, Finn explains that Bell is likely to be used as a decoy, whether or not Bell realizes it or not, because there are some doubts on how involved Bell is with the monsters. Like, is it of his own volition, or is Bell being tricked? Tione actually asks Finn if Bell is so important, why not just capture him? But Finn explains that they might be criticized for capturing Bell because there is no definitive proof that Bell is working with monsters, and also Hephaestus is friends with Hestia Familia and they don't want to make enemies of Hephaestus Familia. And they also question if the monsters could really make a plan like this, but Finn says that Garrett spotted Fels, who appears to be a sort of mastermind of sorts behind the monsters. And Finn gives that warning to be very careful of the Black Minotaur, and Eyes mentions that she thinks that the Black Minotaur will just continue to get stronger, and Finn pretty much says if all else fails, we need to at least make sure we kill this Black Minotaur, because if it gets stronger, then it's really imposing a danger on everyone in Orario. And the anime shows a conversation between Osfi and Hermes. This conversation was originally between Oranos and Hermes, but I am glad they kept the chessboard in. The weird thing about the chessboard is that Hermes was actually whittling like custom pieces, and they were representing like Finn, the Amazons, Leto, and Gross, and he's also whittling away a piece that resembled Bell. So they kept the chessboard, but not the original pieces that Hermes is actually making, because he's always over the top. And the really weird thing I thought the anime executed really oddly was the scene where you have Bell, Fels, Finn, and Hermes all in the same frame together. What that's trying to emulate from the light novel is that Fels, Hermes, and Finn are all having these overlapping conversations, and they all end on the name Bell Cranel. Except the way that the anime does it, these conversations are taking place at separate times. The one that Fels has with the Xenos was combined with the conversation with Hestia Familia, so that was awkward. But in the light novel, they all say his name at the same time. In the anime, it's just Hermes that says Bell's name. It's odd that they still tried to adapt it in the way that they did. And there's also a scene with Freya Familia that I'm not sure what they're going to do with, because it's kind of skipped in the anime, but they could still always do it next episode. But basically, Freya gets the gist of the situation from Hermes, and Hermes wants her help, and Freya is pretty much indifferent to the Xenos and Oranos, but she does care about Belle, and she does have a certain plan in mind, and she tells Otaro to go ahead and execute it. But the scene leads it off at that, not telling us what Freya's plan is at the moment. And that's the end of the episode, and again, a lot of stuff is being condensed and changed up to like fit all of this together into one episode so the other 3 can be used for the rest of Volume 11. It's unfortunate that that's the way it has to be, because we only have 12 episodes to work with, and I've voiced this again and again and again, how I wished that Season 2 was just the War Game arc and Haruhime, and then ideally Season 3 would have been 2 core involving all of Volume 8, so we're not skipping the Sears stuff. And again, I'm not sure how they're going to adapt that other scene from the Sears side story into the anime here with Volume 11 in the last 3 episodes, because again, there's an important plot element introduced in that side story that is used in the remaining part of this story, and I don't know how they're going to write around it. I'm kind of sad they skipped over the Asterius scene, the initial scene I talked about with Ryu, but really the main thing I had a problem with in this episode is just completely skipping that conversation that Finn has with Belle. Like, without that conversation, you really question a lot of what Finn and Loki Familia are trying to do, like not even trying to communicate with Belle or Hestia Familia. Well, the truth is, Finn did try to talk to Belle, and then Hermes kind of got in the way. Again, the DanMachi mobile game Memoria Freze has a little tiny side story to coincide with this episode. This time, it's not actually adapting content that was skipped. It's just a little nice scene between Lily and Belle before everything goes down. Though, this is one of those cases where I wish they did adapt a skip scene, so some of you could at least witness it with voice acting. I wish they put that conversation between Belle and Finn there at the very least, but you guys know how I feel about putting skip scenes into the mobile game. Like, that should not be the way to go about the adaptation. But again, you can always check out those side stories on Mediocre's YouTube channel, which I'll link in the description. But I'm very curious on how anime-only viewers saw this episode. Obviously, this episode is a setup episode before the crazy stuff that will happen in the last 3, but I felt a lot of the setup was very condensed and rushed through. But again, curious on how you feel, especially when you know about what I told you about Loki Familia and Finn. And as for the light novel readers, do you share my worries about that particular portion in Sears' story that I am worried about and how it will be adapted into these remaining 3 episodes, because it's pretty dang important. But I'll see you guys again next week for episode 10. If you want to see more DanMachi content, go ahead, like the video, sub to the channel, follow me on Twitter, and join my Discord. And as always, continue enjoying your time adventuring in Orario and the dungeon. This is Lorne, your guild advisor, signing out.